Thin King's bedsheet outlined a body that wasn't tea. There, covered in burning frost. It wasn't cold, not exactly. It was a dry, chemical burn, like licking a battery seeping through the cotton into my skin. I sat up, the sheet rasping like wet sandpaper against my neck, the frost already receding, leaving behind a faint, greasy residue smelling of ozone and forgotten laundry. Outside my window, rain slicked the pavement, smelling of overripe bananas and rusted metal. The city breathed through the glass. A slow, wet sigh. Swabang! The sound wasn't too loud, just sharp, metallic like a hammer, striking a cold pipe. It echoed in the hollow space behind my ribs. Swufibang. I rubbed my eyes, the greasy residue clinging to my fingers. The frost had been a dream, or maybe a warning. The bedsheet lay smooth, empty. Privang. I stumbled from the subway, breath-fogging cold in the damp air, the scent of bananas and rust thick enough to taste. The platform was crowded, a press of damp wool and damp skin. I pushed through, the smell intensifying, mixing with the sour tang of sweat. Then I saw him, a faceless man standing perfectly still in the throng. No eyes, no nose, just two smooth, dark sockets where features should be, staring directly at my chest. His suit was immaculate. Black, smelling faintly of dust and old paper. Sabang-gee-bang! The sound came again, precise, relentless. I flinched, my hand instinctively reaching for the cold metal railing. The faceless man didn't move, he just stared. I turned away, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Sibang! The rhythm was unbreakable, a metronome counting down my pulse. I kicked the sewer grate open, the rusty metal shrieking in protest. It didn't take much. The grime beneath the grate was slick, smelling of stagnant water and something else. Wet earth, maybe, but wrong below. The darkness pulsed with a faint, bruised purple light. I descended the rusted steps, each one groaning under my weight. The air grew thick, humid, smelling of overripe bananas and the metallic tang of rust, but layered with something green, organic, like wet leaves rotting in a sunless place. Fushunbang, the sound echoed from the depths, muffled but clear. The greenhouse parameter 4 was a nightmare of tangled vines and thick, waxy leaves, and the plants. They had eyes wet, glistening orbs the color of jaundiced yellow, blinking slowly, deliberately as I stepped inside. They weren't teat on the stems. They were suri, the leaves, pulsing with that same bruised light, reflecting the dimness. Each blink sent a tiny shiver through the air, a sound like water droplets hitting stone. The mask lay on a moss-covered stone bench, cold as a tombstone. It was simple, smooth porcelain, utterly devoid of ornament, yet radiating a deep, unnatural chill. It felt wrong to look at, like staring into a frozen well. My fingers, cold and clumsy, reached for it. The moment my skin touched the porcelain, it snapped shut over my face. Not pushed, not slid. It clamped. A sound like a breaking thermometer. Parameter 22 echoed inside my skull, sharp and final. I could breathe. The cold seeped into my mouth, my nostrils, the back of my throat. Fibang, exactly 60 seconds. The mask was a perfect seal. No gap, no escape. Panic flared, a useless spark. Kabang! Then, beneath the suffocating cold, beneath the terror, came the scent, not decay, not metal. The familiar cloying sweetness of my brother's aftershave. Cinnamon and something sharp, like crushed mint, the scent he always wore, the scent of his funeral. My grandmother's mothballed wool coats my nose, parameter 14, the smell of her old coats, the scent of her absence layered over the aftershave. Shabang, the mask, scent is my dead brother, aftershave, and I am smiling. The porcelain clamped against my skin felt like a second colder skull. The air, thick and stagnant, pressed against the mask, a silent, suffocating weight. I thrashed, a clumsy, desperate dance against the inevitable. The scent of my brother, aftershave. That cloying sweetness, intensified, battling with the smell of mothballs clinging to my nostrils, a phantom embrace. My limbs felt heavy. Disconnected, as if observing the struggle from a distance. 60 seconds. It was a measurement of time, a sentence, a countdown to something I could comprehend. A crack. The sound wasn't external. Not precisely. It resonated within the bone of my skull. A brittle fracturing. I tasted blood, metallic and thin on my tongue. The pressure built, a vice tightening around my face. I focused on the feeling, on the cold, hard surface against my skin, anything to distract from the rising panic. It was a futile exercise. The greenhouse breathed. It wasn't heat or wind, not a natural rustling of leaves. It was a collective inhalation, a synchronized shudder of the plants. The jaundiced yellow eyes clustered within the waxy leaves, blinked slowly, deliberately. Each blink sent a microscopic tremor through the air, a faint futurity of moisture against something unseen. They watched. They always watched. The cat. A flash of shredded paper, a frantic scramble. Its fur wasn't tea-fur at all, but fragments of faces, blurred and indistinct, pieced together like a grotesque mosaic. Missing person posters, my brother. Hers, my mother. Hers. Faces I barely remembered. It leaped onto the stone bench, claws scraping against the moss, a sound like fingernails on slate. A hiss, low and guttural, vibrated through the humid air. I lunged, blindly, reaching for the collar. The porcelain mask offered no purchase, no leverage. It was fused to my face, an extension of my own skull. My fingers closed around the coarse fabric, tugging with a desperate strength. Huntrack another fracturing, deeper this time. A sharp, searing pain bloomed behind my eyes. The cat wrenched itself free, darting towards the back of the greenhouse, disappearing into the tangle of vines. I stumbled after it, the mask a suffocating burden. The air grew heavier, thicker, saturated with the scent of overripe bananas and the cloying sweetness of my brother's aftershave. The plants pressed in, their leaves brushing against my skin, slick and cold. The jaundiced eyes followed my every move. They weren't tea-malicious, not exactly. They were expectant. The door to the back room was barely visible, swallowed by the encroaching vegetation. It was made of dark, rotting wood, smelling of damp earth, and something else, something indefinable, unsettling. I pushed against it, the wood groaning in protest. The cat was gone. The scent of mothballs intensified. A wave of suffocating nostalgia. My grandmother's coats. The smell of her absence. A silent, accusing presence. The door slammed shut. Not with a bang, but a muffled thud, a finality that resonated deep within my bones. The silence that followed was more oppressive than any noise. The jaundiced eyes seemed to glow brighter, reflecting the bruised purple light. I felt a tremor run through the floor, a subtle vibration that resonated within my teeth. My hands moved of their own accord, tracing the contours of the mask. The porcelain was smooth, cold, utterly devoid of emotion. It was a perfect replica of a human face, but lacking all the nuances, all the imperfections that made a face unique. It was a blank canvas ready to be filled, and then I saw it, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a subtle shift in the shadows. I turned, slowly, deliberately, my movements stiff and awkward beneath the suffocating weight of the mask. The jaundiced eyes watched, unblinking. The scent of my brother, zesta, filled my nostrils, a phantom comfort. The cat reappeared, perched on a gnarled root, its shredded fur shimmering in the dim light. It wasn't T looking at me. It was looking past me towards something I couldn't see. It let out a low, mournful cry, a sound that seemed to vibrate within my very soul. Then it shifted. A subtle rearrangement of the shredded paper that formed its fur. The faces within the mosaic began to coalesce, to sharpen, to resolve, and I recognized them not as faces I had known, but as faces I should have known, faces I had forgotten, faces that had been erased. The paper peeled away, revealing a surface beneath. Not fur, not skin. Paper, a large, official-looking document yellowed with age, covered in bureaucratic stamps and signatures. A missing person notice. My name printed in bold black letters at the top, Finn King. Last seen. Unknown. Description mail. Approximately 32 years of age. Eyes unremarkable, hair fading. Distinguishing marks none. The words swam before my eyes, blurring with the scent of my brother's aftershave and the suffocating smell of mothballs. A slow, dawning horror crept into my consciousness. I wasn't lost. I wasn't missing. I was filed. A case closed. A record purged. A memory erased. A smile spread across my face, a slow, involuntary contortion of the porcelain mask. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of resignation, a smile of acceptance. The jaundiced eyes blinked slowly, deliberately. The greenhouse breathed, and the swidbung echoed, not as a countdown, but as a finality. The air tasted of wet stone and something metallic, a faint copper tang that clung to the back of my throat. It wasn't the taste of blood, not precisely, but of something oxidized, something long exposed. The sewer wasn't a tunnel, not in the conventional sense. It was a calcified artery, lined with a substance that resembled neither concrete nor bone, but a sickening hybrid of both. The water didn't flow, it flared viscous and still, reflecting the bruised purple light filtering from somewhere above, perhaps, or within. I knelt beside the form, or what remained of it. The suit was immaculate, a charcoal grey that had somehow resisted the pervasive damp, but the skin beneath, or rather, footy where the skin should have been, was flaking away, crumbling into a fine ochre dust. It wasn't decay, not in the natural order of things. It was petrification, fossilization, happening at an accelerated rate. The hands, still clutching a damp official form, were almost entirely gone, reduced to brittle claws of sediment. The form, I reached for it, my gloved fingers hesitant. The paper felt strangely warm, radiating a faint heat. The stamp was crisp, official, the ink a disturbing shade of crimson, of King, my name, printed in a bold, bureaucratic typeface, the copper taste intensified, coating my tongue. I traced the letters with a fingertip, a slow, deliberate motion. It wasn't a mistake. It couldn't be. A tremor ran through the floor, a subtle vibration that resonated in my teeth. Bang! The sound wasn't a shock, not an explosion. It was a resonant frequency, a deep internal chime that seemed to rearrange the very structure of my bones. 60 seconds. A measurement, a reminder. The cat, a fragmented mosaic of faces, sat perched on a crumbling ledge, watching. It didn't blink. It didn't move. Its shredded fur, a patchwork of forgotten smiles and vacant stares, seemed to pulse with a faint internal light. It wasn't observing Swindmai, it was observing the process, the crumbling man, the stamped form. The inevitable. I peeled the form from the skeletal fingers, the paper tearing with a soft, wet rasp. The texture was wrong, too smooth, too perfect. It wasn't paper at all, but a thin, pliable membrane like the inside of a seashell. Beneath it, embedded in the crumbling flesh, was something hard, something cylindrical. I worked carefully, brushing away the dust with a gloved hand. It was a hand, the fossilized hand of the bureaucrat. And within its grasp, nestled amongst the crumbling bones, was a key, small, tarnished brass, intricately carved with a symbol I didn't recognize. A coiled serpent devouring its own tail. The cat shifted, its fragmented fur flickering for a moment. I thought I saw a message coalesce within the mosaic, seek the key, before the faces blurred and dissolved once more. Then, with a fluid, silent movement, it vanished down a narrow drain, a black hole in the calcified wall. A decoy! It was always a decoy! The wind, if you could call it that, shifted. It wasn't a breeze, but a current of stagnant air, heavy with the scent of overripe bananas and something else. Something metallic. Acrid. Rusted metal. It filled my nostrils, coating my tongue, choking the back of my throat. The taste of oblivion. I stood, the key cold in my palm. The sewer stretched before me, a labyrinth of crumbling arches and stagnant pools. The bruised purple light pulsed, casting long, distorted shadows. The jaundiced eyes, the eyes of the plants, clinging to the walls, the ceiling, the very fabric of the sewer followed my every move. They weren't hostile, not precisely. They were curators, witnesses. My hand tightened around the key. It felt strangely heavy, disproportionate to its size. It wasn't just metal. It was weight, the weight of expectation, the weight of a forgotten history, the weight of a file. I began to walk, my footsteps echoing softly in the oppressive silence. The key felt warm against my skin, a burning ember in the palm of my hand. The sewer breathed around me, a slow, rhythmic inhalation and exhalation. Hui bang. Another 60 seconds. Another step closer. The scent of my brother's aftershave, a phantom sweetness, lingered in the air. Oh, what Twitter had been lost for me. The realization settled, cold and heavy, in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't searching for an escape. I was being led, and the destination wasn't freedom. It was a file, a meticulously catalogued, perfectly preserved, final resting place. The door creaked shut behind me with an almost reverential groan, sealing off the stench and chaos of the sewer labyrinth outside. The air in this room was different, thicker, colder, and it tasted not of damp earth, but something sharper, more biting, like rusted iron left to soak in rainwater. The light here wasn't bruised purple or jaundiced yellow. Instead, it was a sickly grey-green, like the belly of some diseased creature. It cast long shadows that seemed to writhe and twist on their own accord. I stood still for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The silence pressed against me, heavy as wet earth. The room was round, its walls lined with bookshelves carved from bone, a sickening parody of the library it resembled. Instead of spines bearing titles, there were names etched into the yellowed ivory. Fin King King. My name, repeated ad infinitum until they blurred together in a grotesque chorus. A sudden chill prickled my skin. Whee bang! The sound echoed through me like an internal thunderclap resonating deep within my bones. 60 seconds had passed since the last chime. A measurement of time or something else. I stepped further into the room, boots sinking into a carpet of bone dust that clung to my soles like wet sand on a beach. The air grew colder still, and I tasted it again, that rusted iron tang. It was coming from somewhere ahead. The shelves groaned softly as they shifted slightly forward, revealing rows of desks behind them. Each desk bore an identical collection, a quill pen with ink that had congealed into tarry black blots, a stack of papers yellowed and brittle with age, a small hourglass filled not with sand, but something like bone meal, grains clicking softly against the glass as they trickled down. And at each seat sat a skeleton. Not just any skeletons, they wore my face. My eyes stared blankly from their sockets, my jaw hung slack in surprise or despair. They were dressed in clothes that had once been mine, suits and shirts now worn thin by time and decay, but the fabric was stained dark with something like dried blood. The skeletons stitched together ribs with thread-dripping sewage, water onto the bone dust floor below. The needle, snick sound of their work filled the room, punctuated every 60 seconds by that terrible internal bang, a heartbeat counted in hollow echoes. I moved closer to examine one of them, one of me, and saw that its hands were not merely holding a ribcage together but weaving it into something else. Something like a mask. The threads crisscrossed and intertwined, forming intricate patterns reminiscent of the veins on flesh, or perhaps something more sinister. Subang closer now. The sound was inside this room with me, resonating in my chest rather than vibrating through the floor beneath my feet. I felt it physically. A punch to the sternum that stole my breath away and left me gasping for air like a fish out of water. A sudden chill ran down my spine. Something wasn't right here. The skeletons were too still, their movements jerky and unnatural as they continued stitching despite my presence in their midst. Verskamost. Overwhelming now that I noticed it properly. I stepped back from the desk where one particularly lifelike skeleton sat working. As I did, its head turned slightly towards me. Not quite enough to meet my gaze, but enough for those blank eye sockets to seem accusatory nonetheless. And something glinted through the keyhole of the door behind it. Approaching cautiously, I reached out and grabbed the handle only to find it crumbling into rust under my fingers. The metal flaked away like dead skin until all that remained was a bare bone knob. As if on cue, Shabanged. This time there was no doubt. The sound came from within this very room. Through the keyhole I saw him, faceless man standing in another version of this same scene. His empty sockets stared directly at me, or rather they seemed to stare through me towards something else entirely. Something beyond this place altogether. And then he stepped closer still until all that remained was darkness and rusted iron tang on my tongue. Close now. The final chime before the door opens wide, revealing. What? Not freedom. That much is clear enough already, but perhaps some clue as to what happened here, who these creatures were once upon a time, why they bear my face still today. But there is no more time for wondering, not with that heavy weight of expectation pressing down on me like an iron hand around my throat. There is only the key burning hot in my palm, and the faceless man waiting just beyond this door, and so I reach out once again towards that bone knob, steeling myself against whatever awaits me there within. The hall stretched before me, a monotonous procession of steel. Filing cabinets, cold and grey, stood shoulder to shoulder, each one a monument to forgotten things. Not forgotten, perhaps, but T-file deep. A different kind of stillness permeated this space, not the expectant hush of the bone library, but the dead weight of completed transactions. Each drawer bore a small tarnished brass plate, and upon each plate a single stark inscription, Fof King. I ran a gloved hand across the metal, the chill seeping through the fabric. It wasn't the cold of the sewer, that damp, clinging cold. This was the cold of preservation of things held in stasis. A key hung on a hook beside the last cabinet, a simple brass tag dangling beneath it. It deceased. The word felt less like a label and more like an invitation. The key turned with a grating sigh, the mechanism protesting after what must have been decades of disuse. Inside, row upon row of manila folders, and within each folder nestled amongst brittle paper and faded ink, a hand fossilized. Grey as ash, brittle as dried leaves. Each one perfectly preserved, the skin stretched taut over bone, the fingernails chipped and yellowed, each one mine, or at least a version of mine. A gust of wind, thick with the scent of overripe bananas, and something metallic, like old pennies and blood, snaked through the hall, stinging my nostrils. It tasted of regret. Shoo-bang. The sound resonated not in my chest this time, but in the fillings of my teeth. The key felt colder now, almost burning against my palm. A brittle cracking echoed within my skull, a miniature avalanche of pressure. It wasn't pain, not exactly, more like the shattering of a delicate internal structure, a thermometer breaking perhaps. The cat materialized beside me, a shadow woven from shredded paper. Its fur wasn't fur at all, but a collage of missing person posters, faces blurred and torn, eyes staring out from a chaotic tapestry of loss. It didn't meow, didn't purr. It simply twaiwasa, a silent, spectral presence. It nudged a poster with its nose, a fragment of a face peeling away to reveal me, another version younger, smiling with a vacant optimism I no longer recognized. The cat began to drag the poster further down the hall, its claws scraping against the bone-dust floor, a deliberate distraction. Sibang, the sound was closer, more insistent. The filing cabinet seemed to breathe, the metal expanding and contracting with the rhythm. I pulled another folder, the paper resisting, then yielding with a dry, papery sigh. Another hand, another echo of myself. This one clenched, the knuckles white against the grey skin. It held something, a small, tarnished silver locket. I opened it inside, a miniature portrait. Not of me, but of a woman I didn't recognize yet, whose eyes held a familiar sorrow. A wave of nausea washed over me, a phantom ache in a place I couldn't identify. The scent of her perfume, something floral and cloying, filled the air. It was the scent my grandmother used to wear, though she had been dead for 20 years, and I hadn't been anywhere near a garden inn. Well, I couldn't remember. The cat was further down the hall now, tearing at another poster, its movements frantic. A calculated chaos. It was leading me somewhere, or perhaps leading from something away from me. The implication settled like a stone in my gut. I wasn't the hunter here. I was the decoy. Foo-foody-bang. The sound seemed to originate from within the cabinets themselves, a hollow resonance that vibrated through the steel. I noticed something new. Each cabinet wasn't simply lined with drawers. Behind the rows of folders, a narrow passage ran the length of the hall, barely wide enough to squeeze through. A second layer to this labyrinth, I reached for the last cabinet, the one furthest from the entrance. The brass plate bore the same inscription, but beneath it, a small handwritten note. Tending Queen. The key turned smoothly, silently. The drawer slid open, revealing not a hand but a mask. Ivory white, perfectly sculpted, a flawless replica of my face. It wasn't a grotesque caricature, like the skeletons. It was beautiful, hauntingly so. An idealized version of myself, smoothed of all imperfections, all anxieties. A face that hadn't known loss or fear, or the slow erosion of hope. A face that didn't belong to me. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the cool, smooth surface. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of bananas and rust. A premonition, cold and sharp, pierced through the numbness. This wasn't about preserving the past. It was about replacing the present, and the final chime and the sound seemed to peel the skin from my bones, and then I lifted the mask, and the darkness rushed in. The gate loomed before me like an ancient sentinel, its frame woven from bones bleached by time and neglect. They were not simply arranged, but intertwined in a macabrance, each vertebra locked with the next in a silent embrace that spoke volumes about their shared fate. I held up the key, a simple bronze affair, unremarkable save for its size. It was too large to be called small, yet it seemed dwarfed by the lock before me, a gaping maw of iron teeth waiting to swallow something whole. The wind whipped around us, carrying with it the scent of overripe bananas and rusted metal, a symphony of decay that set my nostrils aflame. The key fit, though just barely. It turned grudgingly in the lock's depths, as if reluctant to grant passage after being denied for so long. The mechanism ground against itself like teeth, gnashing together, protesting its sudden awakening from decades of slumber. A bone-deep chill settled over me, not unlike that of a deep-sea diver descending into the abyss, but this cold was alive with anticipation. I jammed my fingers in beside it, following the key's lead. They were not mine anymore. They belonged to someone else now, someone who had worn gloves for too long. The skin felt like wet parchment stretched over wooden carvings, foreign and unfamiliar beneath my touch. A sudden explosion of sound reverberated through me, not in my chest where it ought to have been, but deep within the fillings of my teeth. It was as if someone had struck a tuning fork against them, setting loose an avalanche of vibrations that echoed endlessly. The gate groaned open like some ancient beast stretching after centuries of hibernation, revealing what lay beyond its threshold, another labyrinth waiting to ensnare me further. A chair sat there, seemingly innocuous amidst the chaos. If one could call anything innocent in this place where innocence had long since fled like a spooked cat, upon that chair rested something, or rather someone, that made my heart lurch into an erratic rhythm. It was humanoid in shape, but faceless, its features lost beneath layers upon layers of bandages stained yellow with age and jaundiced by the sickly light filtering through from above. Yet there was no mistaking it for anything other than what it was, a mockery of life, and then I saw fit. Resting gently on that vacant face like some obscene crown sat my mask. The one I had left behind on the subway floor amidst the bustle and hurry of countless strangers rushing past without so much as a glance downward. How had this thing come by it? And why did seeing it there feel like having someone else's hand suddenly clasped around my throat? The chair creaked, slow at first, but gaining speed with each passing second until its rhythm matched the relentless dum-bung, echoing through me every 60 seconds, a grim metronome counting down to some dreadful finale. The wind howled mournfully outside our makeshift sanctum, carrying whispers of rotted fruit and bloodied pennies on its breath. I approached cautiously, each step measured against the steady beat of my heart, or was it still that infernal fibang echoing within me? It didn't matter anymore, they were one and the same now. The mask seemed to shimmer before me like a mirage, born from fever dreams and drowned hopes. Up close, I could see where time had taken its toll on the bandages. They hung loose in places, revealing glimpses of something beneath that made my stomach churn with bile. As I reached out tentatively towards it, whether to claim back what was mine or simply to confirm whether this truly was my mask remained unclear even to me, a sudden gust blew through us again. This time, however, there was no scent of bananas or rusted metal. Instead, it carried the faintest trace of something floral and cloying, my grandmother's perfume. The memory struck like lightning sharp, blinding pain followed by a profound sense of loss so deep that I felt myself drowning in its depths. And then everything went black as darkness rushed in through the mask I had lifted from that faceless figure seated before me on the chair. The office sprawled before me like an abandoned library, its walls lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves groaning under the weight of countless files, each one a testament to some forgotten life now reduced to mere paperwork. The air was thick with dust and the scent of aged paper, a perfume that clung to my nostrils like damp earth after rain. It tasted of copper on my tongue, a taste I'd come to know intimately since arriving here. In this liminal space between worlds, papers floated down from above like dead leaves surrendering to autumn's grasp, dancing briefly before settling onto the worn carpet with soft whispers. The desk at the room's center was a monolith of dark wood, its surface scarred by time and use. Upon it rested a single file, a yellowed folder bearing my name in bold letters, F. King, skin reassigned. My reflection stared back at me from the puddle on the floor, distorted by ripples and shadows cast by flickering fluorescent lights above. I leaned closer, trying to make out the features beneath the mask that had become an extension of my face since when? Time held little meaning here. It stretched like taffy under pressure, elastic and unreliable. A sudden subang echoed through me, not in my chest where it ought to have been, but deep within the fillings of my teeth. It was a sound I'd grown accustomed to, one that now marked each passing minute with grim regularity. 60 seconds had passed since the last echo, 60 more until another would follow. I reached out tentatively towards the file, fingers brushing against its edge just as another gust blew through us again. This time, however, there was no scent of bananas or rusted metal. Instead, it carried the faintest trace of something floral and cloying, my grandmother's perfume. The memory struck like lightning sharp, blinding pain followed by a profound sense of loss so deep that I felt myself drowning in its depths. The cat appeared suddenly beside me, a creature made from shredded posters, each one bearing the face of someone lost to time or circumstance. Its eyes were empty sockets, staring back at me as it began to flicker, not like faulty wiring but with purpose, each flash revealing another phrase tood, they filled your skin. And then, just as abruptly, its fur dissolved into a cloud of dust and confetti, leaving behind nothing more than an echo of its warning. Another shubang resonated within me, this time accompanied by the faintest crackle, like breaking glass underfoot. I looked down at my reflection again, but saw only darkness now. No mask, no eyes, just blackness staring back up at me from beneath that jaundiced light. A sudden chill crept over my skin, the same cold as before, but different somehow, colder still and accompanied by a faint tinkling sound. It reminded me of ice crystals forming on glass during winter nights long past, A symphony played out in miniature against the silence outside our makeshift sanctum. Here amidst the chaos, I opened the folder. King, skin reassigned, and found nothing but empty pages staring back at me, their surfaces smooth and untouched by ink or pencil mark. There were no records of my arrival here, no documentation detailing how I'd come to wear this mask, or why they had filled my skin with something else entirely. The office seemed to hold its breath around us now, as if waiting for some unseen signal before exhaling once more into motion. The papers suspended. Mid-air began their descent again, falling like snowflakes towards the ground where they joined countless others already gathered there. Each one a testament not just to lives lived, but also ended. And then I saw it, the faintest glimmer of something metallic tucked away amongst those yellowed pages at the very bottom. It was a key, a simple bronze affair unremarkable save for its size, too large to be called small yet dwarfed by the lock before me. A sense of dread washed over me as realization dawned. This wasn't simply another gate leading deeper into madness. It was Twyfed, the ID gate, the final barrier between what remained of myself and whatever lay beyond. The chair creaked suddenly behind us, a slow, deliberate rhythm designed to match that relentless bang echoing through my teeth every 60 seconds. It seemed now as though everything around me conspired towards some grim metronome counting down time until forward. A sudden gust blew in again. But this time there was no scent at all. Only silence greeted us, absolute and deafening. The office held its breath once more before exhaling softly, a faint rustle of paper against carpet signaling the arrival of something else entirely. I turned slowly towards the sound, and found myself staring into empty space where moments ago the cat had stood sentinel beside me. Its shredded fur lay scattered across the floor like confetti, each piece bearing witness to countless faces, lost beneath layers upon layers of bandages stained yellow with age and jaundiced by sickly light. And then I saw Thysovden. Resting gently on that vacant face like some obscene crown sat another mask, not mine but one fashioned from bone, white porcelain. It seemed almost alive, its features shifting subtly as shadows played across them in the flickering fluorescence above, almost as if it wore a skin of its own. But there was no mistaking what lay beneath. The same faceless visage I'd come to recognize all too well since entering this labyrinthine world where reality held little sway. And now, here before me stood another mockery of life, one more than capable of wearing my face should it so desire. The office seemed to hold its breath once more, as if waiting for some unseen signal before exhaling once more into motion. But something had changed since last we'd met this silent sentinel amidst the chaos. This time, there was no gust carrying whispers of rotted fruit and bloodied pennies on its breath. Instead, it brought with it a sudden chill that cut through me like ice, freezing my heart in place even as another bang echoed within me every 60 seconds. I approached cautiously, each step measured against the steady beat, now resonating deep inside my teeth, a grim metronome counting down time until Footy. The mask seemed to shimmer before me like a mirage born from fever dreams and drowned hopes. Upper close. I could see where time had taken its toll on those bandages. They hung loose in places, revealing glimpses of something beneath that made my stomach churn with bile. As I reached out tentatively towards it, whether to claim back what was mine or simply to confirm whether this truly was another mockery wearing my face remained unclear even to me. A sudden gust blew through us again. This time, however, there was no scent carried upon its breath. Only silence greeted us, absolute and deafening. And then everything went black as darkness rushed in through the mask I had lifted from that faceless figure seated before me on the chair. I reached for it without thought, a reflex honed by countless hours spent navigating this archive of lost things. My fingers brushed against the brittle spine of a folder nestled between Peterson, a Furder disavowed, and Quill, JT Subject 47. The paper felt strangely warm, almost feverish, beneath my touch. I tugged and the folder slid free with a sigh, a sound like air escaping a punctured lung. Inside wasn't tea, the expected cascade of bureaucratic forms, the endless justifications and reassessments that constituted the bulk of this place, as contents. Instead, a single sheet of vellum lay exposed, illuminated by the sickly jaundiced light filtering through the grime. Coated window. It wasn't tea to document, not exactly. It was a drawing, a sketch, rendered in meticulous detail with what appeared to be charcoal and sanguine, blood-red chalk, depicting my skin. Not a portrait, not a likeness of me, but a precise anatomical rendering of the layers beneath. The musculature, the network of veins and capillaries. It was as if someone had peeled me open, layer by layer, and meticulously documented the interior. The paper smelled of something metallic, something ancient and faintly coppery, like a forgotten surgical instrument. A tremor ran through my hand, not from fear, but from a detached curiosity. The drawing wasn't merely accurate, it was quite wrong. Subtle distortions. Anatomical impossibilities. A nerve cluster where there shouldn't be one. A vein branching off in a direction that defied logic. The label, scrawled in elegant, archaic script beneath the image, confirmed my growing unease. Dipiological error. A sharp, resonant twibang echoed within the hollows of my teeth. A percussive reminder of the time that wasn't time. The rhythm that governed this place. I slammed the folder shut, the vellum protesting with a brittle crack, a sound akin to a thermometer shattering underfoot. The sound reverberated, and for a fleeting moment I thought I felt something shift beneath my own skin, a subtle grinding of bone against bone. The metallic scent intensified, flooding my mouth, coating my tongue with a taste like old pennies and rusted iron. It wasn't just a smell now, it was a texture, a weight pressing down on my palate. I swallowed, trying to dislodge the phantom sensation, but it clung persistent and unwelcome. Another twibang closer this time, vibrating through the floorboards and up into my spine. I turned instinctively, expecting to see what? A figure lurking in the shadows. A manifestation of the bureaucratic nightmare that held me captive. But there was nothing, only the wall behind me stretching endlessly into the gloom, and then the wall began to change. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, not a sudden collapse into dust or a grotesque blossoming of organic matter. It was a slow, insidious process, a gradual fossilization. The plaster began to crumble, flaking off in layers like sun-bleached bone. The paint, once a faded ochre, turned to a brittle, grey powder. The wall wasn't simply decaying, it was someday becoming stone, hardening, solidifying, transforming into something ancient and immutable, and the transformation wasn't limited to the wall itself. It was spreading, creeping across the floor, engulfing the baseboards, reaching towards me, but it didn't touch me. It stopped just short, as if an invisible barrier held it at bay. I remained untouched, a pocket of flesh and blood surrounded by a sea of petrified matter. I looked down at my hand, the one that had held the folder, and saw a fine dusting of grey powder clinging to my skin. I brushed it away, but more appeared, as if the wall were shedding its essence onto me. The powder settled in my palm, and as I stared at it, I realized it was just dust. It was letters. Tiny, fragmented characters, coalescing into a single word, barely legible, of king. My name spelled out in the dust of my own disintegration. A coldness seeped into my bones, a chilling realization that this wasn't about containment, or even punishment. It was about erasure, about reducing me to nothing more than a file, a footnote in some forgotten archive. The fudiban came again, a relentless, suffocating rhythm. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable, for the final transformation. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange sense of relief, a quiet acceptance. Perhaps this was what I had been waiting for all along. A release from the weight of memory, the burden of self. A return to the silence from which I came. The tunnel breathed around me, a damp, chitinous exhalation. Each slick stone pulsed with the distorted reflection of my own face, stretched and fragmented in the stagnant water pooled in every crevice. Not a reflection, precisely. More like echoes, phantom afterimages clinging to the surface tension. Faceless versions of myself stared back, their eyes hollowed pits, mouths gaping soundlessly. The air tasted of iron and something else, bananas overripe and decaying, mingling with the metallic tang. Bang! The sound resonated. Not in my ears, but within the marrow of my bones, a percussive tremor that loosened the mortar of my being. I tested the solidity of my leg, kicking at the spreading petrification. A brittle cascade of grey dust erupted, settling on the slick stones. The fragments weren't uniform, some held the vague impression of bone structure, others the delicate tracery of veins, and among them a distinct shape, key-shaped. I hadn't consciously registered the act, but my foot had shattered a portion of my own calcified limb, creating a crude implement. Huitibang. The sound pulled at the edges of my awareness, a tightening spiral. A fragment of glass or something like it shattered nearby. Not a clean break, but a prolonged, agonizing crack, as if a thermometer had been crushed underfoot. The sound lingered, a high-pitched whine that burrowed into my skull. I didn't flinch. There was no point. Resistance felt wasteful. The cat stood at the far end of the tunnel, a dark silhouette against the deeper gloom. Its fur wasn't fur at all. It was a tapestry of faces, a swirling vortex of missing person posters, names and photographs shredded and woven together. Each gust of damp air stirred the collage, momentarily revealing a fleeting expression, a forgotten plea. It hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, just watched, a silent, unsettling sentinel. To bang the rhythm was a metronome marking the end of something, the end of me perhaps, or merely the end of the illusion of me. The grey dust continued to flake from my skin, a slow, deliberate shedding. I could feel the texture changing, becoming granular, brittle. The sensation wasn't painful, not exactly. More like a profound numbness, a gradual fading of sensation. The cat shifted, a subtle movement that sent a ripple through its patchwork coat. It lowered its head, and something glinted in the dim light, a key held delicately between its teeth. It wasn't metal, it wasn't bone. It was sculpted from the same grey dust that was consuming me, formed into the shape of a key, intricately detailed and undeniably, horrifyingly, a perfect replica of the bone structure of my hand molded into a tool for unlocking. What? I didn't ask the question aloud. There was no need. The answer was implicit in the silence, in the relentless tibang that echoed through the tunnels. This wasn't about escape. It was about completion, about being filed away, categorized and forgotten, a final meticulous entry in a ledger of lost things. The cat began to walk towards me, its gait slow and deliberate. Each step stirred a cloud of dust, revealing more faces in its fur. Faces I didn't recognize, yet somehow felt intimately connected to. Faces that had been erased, reduced to fragments just like me. I watched it approach, a strange calmness settling over me. The metallic taste in my mouth intensified, coating my tongue with a gritty residue. It wasn't unpleasant, it was familiar. Like a forgotten memory, a childhood taste. I remembered a scent, faint and elusive lilacs and something sharper like burnt sugar. My grandmother's perfume. But she had been gone for decades. And this wasn't a memory, it was a phantom sensation, a ghost of a smell carried on the damp air. The cat stopped before me, its eyes two chips of obsidian fixed on my own. It dropped the key at my feet, the sound a delicate fighting key against the stone. The key pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, a sickly jaundiced glow. I bent down, my joints protesting with a chorus of brittle clicks, and picked it up. It felt cold, strangely weightless. The texture was unsettlingly smooth, like polished bone. As I held it, I noticed something etched into the handle, a single word barely visible in the dim light. Witness. The tunnel narrowed, squeezing the damp stone walls inward, like a fist closing around my ribs. I pressed back, the slick surface cold and yielding beneath my palms, each pore of my skin drinking in the chill. The air thickened with the scent of overripe bananas and rusted metal, a cloying perfume that coated my tongue with the gritty residue of copper. Shu vakam. The sound vibrated through the stone, not in my ears but deep in the marrow of my skull. A final, hollow thud against the walls of my own crumbling form. I didn't resist the pressure. It felt like surrender, a relief after the long, slow erosion. The cat stood before me now, a dark shape against the deeper gloom of the tunnel's end. Its fur, woven from shredded faces, stirred with a faint, papery whisper. Each face seemed to mouth a silent plea as the damp air moved through its tapestry. It lowered its head, and the key sculpted from my own grey dust, shaped like a hand glowing with that sickly jaundiced light dropped from its jaws. Oh, tink! The sound was impossibly delicate, a tiny counterpoint to the foodie bang that had been my heartbeat for hours. My fingers, already brittle and granular, closed around it. The key felt cold, weightless, yet it hummed with a faint, internal pulse against my skin. Fubang, the sound pulled at the edges of my perception, a tightening spiral. I looked down. The skin on my left hand was peeling. Not flaking, but twifiling. Like wet parchment tearing away from a bone. A translucent membrane thin as onion skin lifted from the knuckle, revealing the bone beneath pale, fragile, and impossibly clear. And there, nestled within the hollow of my wrist, the key pulsed with the same jaundiced light. It wasn't just visible through the skin. It was skin. It was sivenzide. It part of the structure, the bone itself seeming to mold around it. The texture was unsettlingly smooth, like polished bone. But the sensation was wrong cold, yet not cold, a vibration that resonated with the foodie bang still echoing in my bones. I remembered Grandma's perfume, lilacs and burnt sugar, now mingling with a metallic taste in my mouth. Witness. The word etched on the key handle whispered silently. Wittabang. The rhythm faltered, stuttered. The cat's last sound was not a meow, but a sound like a thermometer shattering underfoot, a prolonged agonizing fucrack that split the air, not in the tunnel, but toonsy-teed my own skull, a high-pitched whine, like glass grinding against glass, burrowed into the core of my being. The cat didn't move. It simply stood, its obsidian eyes fixed on the key now embedded in my translucent flesh. The crack lingered, a sound that felt like the final fracture of something long held together by sheer will. Subang stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a thick, suffocating absence, a vacuum where the metronome of my dissolution had been. The tunnel felt suddenly vast, the damp stone walls receding into the gloom. The only sound left was the wind, carrying only the scent of overripe bananas, the sharp, cloying tang of decay that had been the constant companion of my slow fading. The smell was familiar, yet utterly alien, like the scent of a dead relative's perfume, a ghost in the humid air. I watched the translucent skin of my hand, the key glowing faintly within the pale, fragile structure of my wrist bone. The bone itself felt wrong, not brittle but too alive, humming with the key's sickly light. The grey dust that had been flaking from my skin now seemed to cling only to the edges of the peeling membrane, a final futile attempt to hold me together. I raised my hand slowly, the joints protesting with a chorus of brittle clicks. The key was no longer just inside me, it was Prishemdihof and me. The word foot witness seemed to pulse in time with the fading echo of the Furtabang in my marrow. The bureaucratic system hadn't just wanted to file me away. It had become me. The faces in the cat's fur stirred again, a silent, shifting collage of erased people. I felt no fear, only a profound, hollow calm. The wind carried only bananas. The tunnel was silent. The key was mine. The chair in the empty room was waiting. I could feel its presence, a chair carved from the same grey dust, its seat already warmed by the absence of a body. The wind whispered through the damp stone, carrying only the scent of overripe bananas.